The United States has expelled South Africa's ambassador after a right-wing news outlet reported that he said that Donald Trump was leading a white supremacist movement. Ebrahim Rasool has been given 72 hours to leave the country. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio called Rasool, quote, a race-baiting politician who hates America and the president. The diplomatic row flared up after a U.S. media company reported the comments the ambassador made in an online discussion with a South African think tank. Tensions with the U.S. have been high, with Donald Trump recently freezing aid to South Africa. And joining us now from Johannesburg is our correspondent, Dianne Hawker. Dianne, good to see you. What more can you tell us about the circumstances behind the expulsion of the South African ambassador to the U.S.?
Well, Mariana, Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool was, as you mentioned, participating in a webinar, and the focus of that webinar was the changing conditions within the U.S. administration and how it would likely affect South Africa and the African continent. As we've already seen, there have already been impacts of the administration with cuts to aid to South Africa, but also to funding for HIV/AIDS treatment across the continent and across the world. And he was providing context to those participating, explaining how he felt that they should view the actions of the U.S. administration. In that explanation, he referred to the U.S. administration as being led by a supremacist agenda. And also he made mention of the U.S. President Donald Trump, particularly along with his ally Elon Musk, taking that supremacist agenda outside of the US and globalizing it. Let's take a listen to some of what Rasool had to say.
I think what Donald Trump is launching is an assault on incumbency, those who are in power, by mobilizing a supremacism against the incumbency at home. And I think I've illustrated abroad as well. So in terms of that, the supremacist assault on incumbency, we see it in the domestic politics of the USA, the MAGA movement, the Make America Great Again movement, as a response, not simply to a supremacist instinct, but to very clear data that shows great demographic shifts in the USA, in which the voting electorate in the USA is projected to become 48% white.
Okay, Dianne, excuse me, can you tell us perhaps a bit more what the point the ambassador was trying to get across?
Well, certainly he was speaking, Mariana, about how the conditions within the United States have changed significantly and how those conditions will ultimately affect diplomacy and those involved in diplomacy. For example, he mentioned that the US government has already started moving from, the way that diplomacy has been done in the past, of more of a let's talk and get along approach, to what he called punitive coercion, taking strong steps and immediate steps quite swiftly against those who the government felt were either acting against them or were not in line with what they expected. And it seems that Ebrahim Rasool himself has now been on the receiving end of what he was trying to describe in that webinar, because he has swiftly been kicked out of the US and given just a few days to pack up his life and leave the country.
And just how much will this incident impact U.S. and South Africa relations more broadly, or is it just personal?
No, this is definitely part of a broader diplomatic situation that we see unfolding between the US and South Africa. shortly after President Donald Trump took office, one of the first things he did was issue an executive order that was specifically focused on aid to South Africa, saying that that aid would be cut. And the reason that he gave for that was an unhappiness about South Africa's land policy and a recently signed expropriation bill that has been signed into to take effect from the beginning of this year. And that has really been the root of this growing unhappiness with the US and South Africa really trying to have these negotiations and discussions with the US, but not receiving feedback.
All right. That was Dianne Hawker in Johannesburg. Many thanks indeed.